My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there. Welcome to Safety Labs. Safety books, theories, and ideas help professionals approach occupational safety from different angles. Many of them borrow from other disciplines such as sociology or organizational psychology, which can shed new light on old problems. But no matter what school of safety thought you belong to, a theory is really no good until you operationalize it. Today's guest has extensive experience in doing just that, and along the way has come to her own conclusions about what's helpful and what's not when it comes to putting theory into practice. Zoë Nation is passionate about including those closest to the work to solve safety and performance challenges. She started 25 years ago in human factors and has worked across rail, oil and gas, logistics, mining, marine, manufacturing, and aviation industries. So he also spent 10 years as the lead human factors and human and organizational performance advisor for Chevron Australia. She now works with various organizations and helps improve safety outcomes by applying contemporary theories and the latest research. She focuses on user-centered, practical solutions and is keen to share what she's learned from her many successes and failures along the way. And Zoë joins us from Perth. Welcome.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Good. Excellent. Me too. Zoë, do you think it's fair to say that there's tribalism in safety circles? Or is that maybe an exaggeration? Like maybe schools of thought is a little more accurate?
No, I think that's a fair assessment. Yeah, so I spent, obviously, as you mentioned, thank you for the introduction, I spent 10 years at Chevron. And so I had my head down and I was sort of almost institutionalized in the end, I think. But I was just very busy and I was doing the work. And when I left Chevron, I sort of popped my head up and joined LinkedIn for the first time and started looking around at what was going on. And I'd always read papers, books, but I'd not followed anything or sort of interacted with people on LinkedIn. And at first it was amazing. I met some amazing people that I'm still in contact with, mentors, contacts, colleagues, which is a great thing. But the other side of it that I started to kind of learn about very quickly was not only the different schools of thought, which I'd always seen in the books and the very objective, well-researched work that I was looking at. There was also some very, very strong opinions, emotions, arguments. And of course, I'd experienced that within my role inside operations, right? We have different lines of thinking. There's lots of different areas of psychology, and you tend to subscribe to certain areas. So there's definitely schools of thoughts, but I think the thing that I observed and has come to frustrate me somewhat is this feeling that there's one way of thinking or someone is more right than the other. So yes, I do talk about human and organizational performance quite a lot, but I'm also super curious as to all of the other amazing work, research that's gone into and continues to go into other schools of thought and other approaches. There is no one way to do things in safety. No one can claim that one thing works. Most people that claim HOP doesn't work, and another person can say, well, I've got this evidence that it does. And so we work in such a diverse, complex set of industries that I think it has to be more curiosity around what works at that place, with that context, at that time, with those people. And what can we take from that worked and it is proven and it's got some evidence behind it and some sound research around what we know about the human psyche, for example, and hopefully apply what makes sense for those people. So that's a long answer to a question. Yes, there's definitely tribalism. And at the end of the day, it's great to have a debate. Love a debate, often involved in debates. But if you ask the Frontline, the person emptying the bin, the person building the scaffolding, they do not care. And that's what I think sometimes distracting. And that's where I get on my soapbox about it a bit.
Well, I'm going to ask you to get on the soapbox because that actually was my next question, is that you've said frontline workers don't care what safety camp you're in.
Absolutely not.
So do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, of course. You know I do. Yeah, so I think to the point, actually, that even talking about safety as a separate entity to the work that they're doing will sometimes generate an eye roll or disengagement. And so if you imagine and put yourself in their shoes, they're coming to work, they've got their job to do, they're given the tools and equipment often, they don't use their own or they can use their own. In some cases, they're given the time that we allocate, we give them the team, we give them the training often, the deadlines, the boss, the context, all of the factors that go around shaping their work. So they're getting on with it, and 99% of the time they're just there to get the job done, and they want to do it well, and they want to enjoy it generally, and all those good things. Over time, if you sort of took a sample of someone being at an organization, large or small, say over 10 years, if you asked them how many different safety things, safety initiatives, safety programs have you done, they will laugh and list off a bunch of different campaigns, posters, acronyms, slogans, ridiculous counts we had to do. So it's to the point where what I'm finding gets the most credibility, gets the better discussion, the better learning, is just talking to them about work. So and putting it in words that we can have a proper, robust discussion about. So even separating it out and talking about safety is not helpful. Never mind then going into, so there's this new thing, HOP. So that was definitely one of my mistakes early on. We did run a big campaign. HOP is coming. Actually, it was HP initially, human performance, and then we changed that. And it was like, human performance is the answer. This is going to be great. You're going to love it. They're going to embrace it. And yeah, the ideas are great. It's very easy to sell to a frontline worker, but all of the posters and the slogans and the safety stuff that goes with it was eye rolls and sighs, and here we go again. Oh, I remember, this is just like that other thing. What did you call that last time? Is this BBS? Is this different? So it's all well intended, but is it helpful, and is it actually achieving what we want to do? I guess is my question always.
Yeah, in terms of context, you've mentioned that you like different approaches, you like to be curious about different approaches, and that you draw from different safety approaches at different times or stages of an organization's development. So I'm wondering if you can give a few examples of kind of stages of organizational maturity and what kinds of tools or approaches might be useful for those stages.
Yeah, awesome. So I think I do, again, there's lots of different models and arguments and discussions about whether this is proven or not. But I do think that explaining safety maturity as a concept is quite helpful. And I often use that. And sometimes I'll just base it in a historical discussion around how safety in general has evolved. So if we think about it, when we started doing sort of industrial revolution type of times, we started doing an enormous increase in industrial and heavy work. And we saw an increase in injuries and death. So what we found is standardize the work and injuries dropped. Oh, you know what? If we tell people how to do the job safely and we make it consistent every time, this should work better. And it did, right? So it had a huge impact. So standardization and introducing clear expectations, ground rules, proceduralizing work, great. But then, of course, over time, our procedures can't cover all of our work. And so we start having adaptations and variability, which is normal. And we start to sort of go, okay, we continue to change the work, we continue to evolve, but the procedures are paper-based or sort of are not evolving with them, right? It's not a dynamic function of the business. So we start to kind of lose that ability to learn and adapt. And so that's when we want to get more feedback. We want to hear from the workforce. And we start talking about things like safety culture, that safety isn't just about the person coming to work. Yes, we want to lay down clear expectations. Safety is important here. How am I going to show you that safety is important here? I'm going to put some rules around it. And then if you don't follow those rules, I'm going to have some consequences. I'm also going to have some incentives, because how do I get a manager to care about safety who's not doing it day to day? Well, I'll incentivize it. And so we introduce things like incentives. And at some point in maturity stages, those things all have added value. But if we continue then down that journey, and if you look at the evolving nature of safety maturity, you then get to the point where people are like, we get it. We're now just filling in a card or trying to meet an incentive to gamify and get our bonus. Whereas people, we're super good at finding efficiencies and finding those things and ways to do it. And so it loses its meaning. And then it's like, you know what? We've got some really high skilled workers now. We're really well practiced in our procedures. Now it's about, how do we adapt more easily? How do we have quicker change? How do we provide quicker lines of feedback? Because now you're getting a more mature workforce that are more autonomous and self-regulating, and managers have got some really great capability in both leadership and safety and know what they're doing. And so you continue along that sort of maturity. And so different schools of thinking or different safety approaches are helpful at different stages. So if I give you an example, and again, this is through my own learning, human and organizational performance is, or I guess safety 2 or safety differently. I think they're all trying to achieve something very similar in a similar way. Is trying to give more of a voice to the worker and stop seeing them as the problem, but as a solution. So how do you empower them, and how do you allow them to solve their own problems? When we've come from an environment maybe of a more hierarchical leadership. I'll tell you, I'm the thinker, you're the doer. Now we're saying, you know what? They are doing this every day. Let's have some humility and ask them and get them to solve the problems. So that, for me, is the key part of any of those approaches, seeing the worker as the solution. I don't think they're the cause of the problem. I think that they're caught up in the system, and I'm interested in all of those things, right? Basic human factors as well. So you take that, and we think that can be applied at any stage. I worked with an organization who had been acquired by a larger, more mature organization. And this smaller group were very early in their safety maturity. So how do we know that? Well, there were very strong indicators. For example, we were having incidents, and the sort of general managers were very quick to blame the safety department. Safety department not doing the job. They had no desire to review any of the incident investigations. Why would I look at an incident investigation? That's what I've got a safety guy for. So we start from that point. So when I started talking about, rules and procedures are very important, but we want to allow some adaptation and discretion, they're like, cool, I'm going to go back to my safety guys and tell them to stop writing that procedure and to stop providing those safety rules that they're developing, because it's a load of rubbish. I don't need them. I can carry on working the way I am. So in that part, I don't think you can skip past some of the stages. We need to set clear expectations. We probably still need to incentivize safety for that particular management group. And we need to upskill them and give them some time to develop those skills and expectations to then move through those maturity stages. Sorry, that's a very long answer, but that's in my head, that tends to work.
You touched on something in there, though, that I was a little bit curious about. Do you think there's a correlation or a relationship in any way between sort of size of company, like a global and maturity? Like, it's not as simple, certainly, as saying a company of this size has this level of maturity. No, but do you think that maybe larger companies or older companies have a little more maturity just because they have more experience, or am I just like looking for patterns where there aren't any?
Like, I by no means can answer that in any scientific way, but in my own limited experience, sadly, I would say that that's not always the case. So, I've worked with different organizations, brand newer organizations in some ways are actually more able to adapt and learn and less set in their ways and less what's the word? They're a little bit more humble and a little bit more curious, as a huge generalization. I have worked with companies that have been around for a long, long time, well established, global. The image they portray is incredible. Um, and and yes, there might be certain parts of that organization that are well resourced and they've been able to employ the best of the best. But there are so many microcultures across organizations that I can go to a head office and it might be a certain way. When I get down to the different sites, the way I know whether that safety implementation is actually working is to see how it's resonating at the different sites. So you can have the most perfect leadership, and it's very important, and it does start from the top. But this middle area and filtering all the way down to frontline, to the language, to the reality, that's often a really big challenge. And I often see it's almost like I've forgotten the word, like not ego, but it's like they're not interested in learning anymore. They're super confident, overconfident. We've done this, we've been there, we've got the best of the best. And so that's a very easy way to lose your curiosity and to lose that sense of vulnerability. I mean, safety, whether it's HRO or any good approach to to safety performance, is to continue to look for the gaps and continue to be curious and continue to self-reflect. Any good leadership is always looking for the next learning. And so I find that sometimes the longer, more established bigger organizations maybe lose that sense of vulnerability more easily. So no, I don't think it does correlate.
Okay, that's interesting. The last time we spoke, you said that no one can just go in and you hopify is what you called it, hopify an organization. And you've talked about that just now in some in relation to maturity, like you can't skip steps, for example. Are there other reasons or other ways, other pitfalls of coming into an organization and with these kinds of ideas and just going whole hog, I guess?
Yeah, and I've definitely learned most of them myself, unfortunately. And just to clarify, I think you can skip steps. I think it just depends. So I just don't think, I think you have to kind of meet people where they are and really get an idea and learn the context first. But yeah, so to answer your question, um, yes, there are many pitfalls. So safety management is so complex, right? And we are constantly looking for the silver bullet and the answer, and there must be a simple solution. Um, and if you combine that with a profession that does struggle sometimes to find its identity, and not always through fault of their own, it's how they're set up in an organization often. Um, when we start, so one example would be going into an organization, and I've seen this happen many times. There's a lot that rings true in some of the branding and the books and the literature around human organizational performance, a lot of which is not new at all. It has been rebranded. I remember sitting in an early session, it was about 12 years ago, and someone sharing for the first time, I think it was 2011, sharing for the first time Todd Conklin's work. And myself and my very good friend and colleague, Shahika, some people on the line will know who she is. We're in the meeting and we were just looking at each other because we were both human factors. She's got a PhD. I'm human factors masters, a practitioner. And we're looking at each other going, what? This is human factors. This is nothing different at all. And they were all so excited about it in this senior meeting. This is it. This is going to be how we reimagine safety. And we were just like, we were getting very frustrated. Again, we were arguing from our camp, and we spent plenty of time arguing about it. But I think that was an example where we took some of those ideas, and our intention was to say, we don't have to overhaul and we don't have to do everything new. You're doing a lot of this stuff already. But we produced a program, we produced poster campaigns, we produced training, we produced videos, all well intended, and it definitely did have a really positive impact across a large part of that global organization. But our mistake in that instance, trying to hopify, was again putting something new in terms of terminology, and it was received really well at management level, but further down again, it's like, oh, here we go again. So everyone would be celebrating it. The other part of that is, so the other downfall, the main one that I just want to touch on, is thinking it's a safety owned thing. So this is the irony. If we talk about human factors, safety differently, HOP, one of the main ideas is our people have the answer. And so the idea would be to ask them. So for me, as a human factors practitioner, that's end user involvement 101. That's, we've got a problem. Who is going to be the ones that have to live with the solution? Therefore, they're the ones that are going to come in and help solve it. And so what I see time and time again is a safety department getting hold of HOP material, HOP ideas, HOP consultants, and going, we're going to sit in the boardroom, we've designed this amazing program, and it is amazing. And then we're going to gift it to you, and you're going to be grateful, and you're going to make it work. And you miss out the most basic part of human factors, which is user engagement. So it's not theirs. So even to the point now where I sort of try and encourage companies not to call it HOP. Just go, right, let's talk about how safety is changing. Let's talk about what it's like at the coal face where you're working. Let's talk about which of these things you want to try. Let's talk about what you want to call it and get them to design it. You won't get ownership. Oh, they're not accountable, they're not owning it. Well, it's because you didn't let them. So I think there's a temptation to get excited and run away with it. Yeah, I've just like produced the cultural, the new cultural vision. It's like, oh, who did you do that with? Oh, I did it with the MDs, and I emailed a few frontline workers, and they didn't disagree, so we're good to go. That's not end user engagement. So I think that's probably the biggest one, is having too much ownership and not letting it be owned by the people who should own it.
Can you describe, certainly this doesn't have to be perfect, but the evolution of your own thinking about safety over the years? Like, are there some key moments that stand out, and key things that you've learned that caused a shift in your perspective?
Wow, that's a really good question. I've never thought about that before. So I think go back to academia. You come out as, from studying and researching and writing your thesis and all the rest of it that we had to do in the UK, and you're going, okay, I'm a human factors expert, so I'm going to teach people what they should be doing, and this is what the guidance and the standard says, and they need to do it. And so for a few years I was a consultant with lots of different industries, which was amazing. And you sort of in that structured early environment, you just dip in and out. I was doing lots of rail work at the time in the UK, and they'd become quite stringent about human factors requirements following some of the major rail incidents there. So it was like, okay, well, this is the rule, I'm going to apply it. So that reinforced my belief that human factors guidance and standards were the right ways to go. And then when I then moved into an operation and inside an organization, that was definitely the biggest pivot for me. And because I clearly remember sending angry emails when I was doing design reviews, and 3D model reviews. Spent hours and hours in 3D models early on, as we were designing some of our plants. And I was right, I'm going to be authoritative, and I'm going to tell them what's what, and I'm going to, they need to come to the party. And so, and then not getting a great response from that, not being, it's not welcomed. You're being, you're getting in the way, Zoe. And I'm like, this is the right thing to do. This is what someone says. So, realizing quite quickly that the power of building relationships and influence. So again, it's not like rocket science, but it's not how we're trained. We're trained that there's like right and wrong, the safe, the non-safe, the correct, the incorrect, sorry. So obviously you start learning quite quickly and have to adapt and go, all right, I need to understand where they're coming from, and I've got to meet them in the middle. It is, no matter what the guidance says, it is not black and white. And so I think getting really comfortable in the gray and the nuance has been one of the biggest, and it still continues to this day, frustrate people who do want answers. I'm an engineer originally. I still work with lots of engineers. It's like, yeah, but what is the answer? So ultimately, just give me an answer. It's like, yeah, sorry. So being comfortable in the gray, influencing, and listening. And then I think that it was a constant steep learning curve inside an organization. Then when I left again, and I do different type of consulting, I'm more sort of working long term with companies. So I do get to see in depth how they work. It's an amazing position to be in. But again, the most important thing I've learned there is being super curious about their context. Like, why would they care about it? And so I see lots of safety professionals get very frustrated. They're not listening. They're not doing the right thing. And it's like, that's because you haven't found what they care about. What is it? Their boss? Is it the promotion? Is it that they love working autonomously? Is it that what's their passion? What drives them? And you've got to learn that first, what they actually care about, and then tie what you're trying to do into that to help sell it, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to pause for a moment here. We're going to hear a quick message from the company behind the podcast, and then we will return to our conversation after that. In industrial manufacturing and construction environments, cutting tools have to handle tough materials without compromising worker safety. Traditional exposed blade knives deliver power, but they also leave room for serious injuries when cuts don't go as planned. The Pacific Handy Cutter Smart Retract Ficta raises the standard. This heavy-duty utility knife combines the cutting depth professionals need with built-in intelligence that helps prevent accidents. Its smart blade retraction automatically pulls the blade back the moment it loses contact with the cutting surface, even if the squeeze trigger is still engaged. The Ficta features a rugged metal handle built for demanding jobs, along with an ergonomic, glove-friendly squeeze trigger that helps reduce hand fatigue during extended use. With a 1-inch or 27-millimeter cutting depth, it powers through triple-walled corrugate and other thick materials with ease. A high-quality carbon steel blade ensures long-lasting performance, and a tool-free blade change keeps downtime to a minimum. Pacific Handy Cutter delivers industrial-grade performance with smarter protection so teams can cut confidently even in the toughest environments. If you'd like to give it a try, go to safetylabspodcast.com/samples. Again, that's safetylabspodcast.com/samples. And now back to our chat. I was curious when you were talking before about, context. How does, and you would have encountered this as a consultant, how does a safety professional go in and kind of know what tool to use at what time or in what context? Like there's a lot of knowledge behind that, but what would be a tip, I suppose, for that?
So, the boring, annoying answer of it depends, obviously. So I need to get to know, I always want to get to know, well, there's a few phases of it. I want to know where the leadership are at, where the most senior leadership are at. Like, what's your why? So the why drives it all for me because if and I've had it many times where it's like, oh, you do that human performance thing. Do you come in and help us because we've got this problem where drivers just aren't paying attention, and we just really need to get them hyper focused. I'm like, yeah, it's not really what we're talking about here. So it's being clear about what they're actually wanting to do and what their motivation is, right? Okay, it's like our peers are doing it, our customers are doing it. Where are they at in terms of some of their safety beliefs? What are they frustrated as something happened? Are they sure that there's something better out there? Have they seen some cool stuff that they want to try? Whatever it is, I need to know the why, and that will help me kind of narrow in. And then I want to also understand, again, this is where we tend to fall down. I'll be talking to a senior leader or a senior safety person, and they're like, oh, I already know what we should be doing. So we definitely want a little bit of education. We want learning teams, and we've got to sort out our investigations. And it's like, okay, that's good. You're probably right, but you're solving you're already defining the implementation plan without any consultation. So what I like to try, my main, I guess, difference to maybe how we've traditionally done safety management and implementation plans is that I want to spend a bunch of time learning first. And we don't know, we've got a lot of that data already. We have the surveys. We might have already run some focus groups. We've got data in our telling us what hazards people are reporting. We've got data telling us where our incidents are. We've got data telling us where our backlog is in our work orders, for example, what's not getting done, what's getting stopped. So I want to learn first. So it's very rare that I'll just go, here's your off-the-shelf implementation plan. There's a general format I would follow, like knowing that there's a clear why. Okay, that's our first qualifier. Great. Secondly, let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. Because again, there's so much confusion, arguments, tribalism around safety stuff and where we've come from. Are you a behavioralist? And I don't think you need to be separate. They all take some good stuff and overlap. So I want to know that we're all talking about the same thing. So a bit of awareness at the top level, some language clarification, a bit of education, and then at the same time, I want to go out and learn. So I want to pull back all the information we can, whether that's getting them to go out and speak to their people, spending time actually getting a clear definition of the problem, and the gaps, and what is the stuff that gets in your way. How easy is it to raise a safety issue? What happens when you do? What feedback do you get? And where do you think the most dangerous place to work is? Where are you most concerned about? Where do you think safety is at in this organization? And you get some amazing stuff. And it's generally, there'll be some themes that it's like, oh, I knew that. And it's like, well, good. That's good that your fingers on the pulse, you knew it. But there's also some surprises. Yeah, I don't think management understand the reality of our work. I don't see our leaders out here unless it's end of the month and trying to meet their target. And so they hear some home truths often as well, which is confronting, but it was what we have to hear, because this is not about fixing the front line, which is another misconception. This is about just as much about leadership, often not intent, but interpretation and perception and how they're being perceived. And so once we've done that, then, it's like choose your own adventure. There's like so many tools I would call are things like understanding how you currently do your safety activities and what elements of human factors or contemporary safety can you put into it. So does it make sense for you to use learning teams for some of your investigations, or even better for some of your problem solving, or for some of your risk assessments? Does it make sense? And learning teams are not the answer. They are one tool. And then other tools would be how you go about and do your leadership engagements, the way that you interact with people, the language that you use. Another one would be procedure writing. I love that one because it goes back to my human factors roots. How do you write a user-friendly procedure? I've never worked with a company that are like, we have nailed procedures, right? I've never, please dial in, leave a message if you've nailed procedures and share it with us. That we've got ourselves into a right mess. So there's lots of good stuff, and it doesn't have to be a huge overhaul. You can learn some of the basics and start chipping away when you've got planned updates of your procedures. It's also how we do shift starts and our practices and our daily routines. What do they look like? How do we measure success? How do we communicate what our expectations are? It's how we build our leadership capability. And I don't mean let's run a whole separate safety hop masterclass. I mean, let's look at all of our HR and L&D requirements for leadership progression and embed it in there. And does it conflict with what we're saying? Are we telling them command and control, and then we're also doing a little add-on module about humble inquiry? It doesn't really match. So yeah, there's so many tools, and that's how I would generally work out which ones are appropriate and have a plan. And the last thing I'll say is experiment, pilot, try with organizations. There'll be some sites that are ready, that get it, their leadership are hungry for it, their leadership are already well respected and have naturally that leadership style. Try that stuff there. Try learning teams there. Try going out and doing observations where you get the truth about all of the rule breaches they're doing day to day, and they don't balk at that. They welcome it. Try it and then continually improve it. You're going to continually adapt and improve it, and it's going to last. It's going to take some time.
You see, or you interact with different sort of levels, safety managers, frontline workers, and the executive, the C-suite. everyone in an organization has a different job to do and they have a different perspective. So I have the same question for two different roles. So what blind spots and pressures have you noticed that are more common in safety managers? And then the same question for executive leadership.
Okay, that's a great question. So one of them for me would be, I think sometimes a safety professional, even up to a senior level, unfortunately overestimates how much a senior executive wants to get into the weeds in safety or understands or thinks about safety. And rightly or wrongly, it's only one of the things that they have to look after. And so it's only going to get a fraction of their mental energy. And so we can spend hours producing justification tools, Excel spreadsheets to prove a point, and they'll give it a cursory glance and go, look, just tell me what I need to do. So I think it's often I think we fall into the trap in a safety field of not playing to our audience. So understanding, so making it board friendly, so we talk about user friendly, but what about exec friendly, board friendly? What do they care about? What have they got time to think about? What's the bottom line? So I think hitting that balance, and that you can see a lot. I see it a lot of time in meetings. The safety person, it's a fine line between them being a trusted partner and being someone I have to have there, but my eyes glaze over a bit when they talk. I've seen that so many times, Ryan. It's all well intended, and they're not doing the wrong thing or a bad job. It's just knowing your audience and being able to adapt. So you're adapting to the front line, but you've got to adapt to that board level. I've done it. I still do it. I love the stuff. I get too into it. But you've got to just really hone in on what they care about, what their language is. So I think that's maybe a gap for safety sometimes, is they get so frustrated. My leader won't do this. They won't fund this. It's like we have to have more skills in marketing at like being a salesperson as well as influencing. It's like, how do you influence up as well as down? For the exec team, I think the biggest blind spot is thinking that you can rely on data. And so we can get so much data, Power BI dashboards, AI tools, and that's awesome. I love data. I want to use it, but I need to complement it with context and stories and reality and shock and pictures. Love using photos, right? It's like show a picture of an absolutely ridiculous non-compliant job. Get them to talk about it, watch their reaction, walk them through the context. You can teach them about context, about one of the hot principles in 10 minutes just by showing them a ridiculous picture and trapping them into reacting and walking them through what they're actually seeing as an example. So people, they need to realize that a lot of people are scared of execs and will tell them what they need to hear and will say yes and won't disagree. And I don't care. They talk about psychological safety so much, and it's a good thing to talk about, but it's not there, and it's hardly ever going to be there with an exec in the room. So I think really knowing that and going, look, I know that my direct reports and my safety people sometimes too aren't going to tell me bad news. So how can I influence that? How can I get multiple sources of information? How can I see it for myself? How can I see reality, bad news, mess, struggle?
Yeah, and maybe how do I deal with it when it does come? Because that's, of course, a message to the future about how I will deal with it when the next one comes. Right?
Yeah, like an eye roll, a shrug. The body language, it's like, I'm going to take a risk and tell him something that he's not going to like. And their response in that moment makes a huge difference. And it's very difficult because we get to that, we see people get to that level because they are action oriented and they're the fixer. And so you're now telling them, slow down, don't fix it, get curious, ask your people what they need to fix it. It's counterintuitive in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I can understand how that would be so for that different level. You spoke about persuasion there just for a second, and I had a question about persuasion. You advocate for the use of science and research as a tool for persuasion. And you also mentioned stories, but you were also cautioning about data. So I think I understand the difference between data and science and research and stories, if that's in another category, those three. But I guess what's your advice for, or how do you think it's most successful to use science and research and stories as a tool for persuasion?
Oh, these are such good questions, Mary. Okay, so I still buy into the idea that safety is a science. And the reason I do that is because over the years, I've seen so many sort of clutching at straws or grabbing at certain words with and using them without understanding actually the psychological mechanics behind what they're saying. And so we tend to give a little bit, dip into it a little bit in our leadership training. We talk a little bit about why people do what they do. We talk a little bit about complacency. We talk a little bit about hindsight bias. We talk a little bit around time pressure and all these ideas. My favorite one, situational awareness, and we dip into them, and then I see it constantly, it being used incorrectly, it being communicated, written, put into procedures incorrectly. And so there is a scientific part of safety, in particular, knowing why people do what they do. And so I think it's really important to actually go, okay, we think this is going to be a great. I was in a site the other 2 years ago, and we ran a safety campaign on hands, and our hand injuries dropped. I'm like, okay, what's the science behind that? Because have you actually done any kind of credible work to prove what you mean? Because as we know, in most cases, or in a lot of cases, that's probably fair to say, is it that injuries dropped, or is it they stopped reporting? And what was the actual felt experience? I get all sorts of questions in my head. That's, to me, unscientific and jumping on a number and not applying statistics and not applying some really basic science that we can do. So let's do the internal research. Let's look at what some of the great research out there says about take fives and about leadership walks and about investigations and about how you learn. There's some really great work being done in that space, and actually go look at that. And then the stories part. So that's really important. I think that's why we need safety professionals and experts, if you will. That's where the strength should be. But to do that, you have to be up to date with those things, and you have to have a responsibility to actually learn and keep learning and keep up to date with the latest research and be interested in it and share it and make it into a bite-sized, appropriate piece of information. The stories part, I think, is really valuable in understanding context, and even more so, some of the empathy and humility that I want to see in decision makers high up in an organization. So every single person has their own reality and perception of things and their own experience, and they'll all go back to, I remember scaffolders, they're a law unto themselves, they never listen, you've got to deal with them a certain way. And so they'll have their own association with some bad experience they had. And that's what they'll carry through and be biased towards. I want to use stories because we're human, and it's the most human thing in the world to listen, respond, learn, remember a story. And it doesn't have to be a grand story. I've got some amazing, crazy stories, but also just really simple ones of an interaction you see, of a good style of leadership, of something that worked, of something that was unexpected. And I think it's even more powerful if you allow the person themselves to tell you. So I had this amazing manager for some time, very senior, and he was very different to the rest because he talked at a different level. So he was a very good communicator. And we were trying to do some more contemporary safety stuff and human performance. And so we used to run a very formal look back on all our very serious incidents. And it was a very formal meeting, and everyone from all the business units in the region would come, all the leads would come, and it was very serious and very bad. This is not a good call because you've been bad. You've got incidents, you're hurting people, bad. And so it would be like going around the room, presentations. They'd all spend hours getting the presentations ready because this is like your regional MD is a pretty big deal. Sorry, regional VP. And so he had the good fortune to realize that that's not how you learn. No one was learning anything. It was like a safety theater, right? I love that term. So we'd rock up. So he said, enough of this. If we're trying to be a learning organization, this is not a learning forum. We're going to change the name of it. It's going to be a learning session. I don't want you to do any slides. My only request is you bring someone who does the work that we're talking about, whether it's in the event, whether it's the work. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? Like, it can be a supervisor or it can be the actual operator. Bring them in. And he said, but to do that, you've got to make this a more comfortable environment. We're going to make this less formal. You can't scare these people. And so it was incredible because you'd actually have real conversations, unscripted questions, testing their knowledge. It's actually uncomfortable for a lot of these execs in the room because they didn't normally have that forum where they were interacting and people watching them interacting. So that allowed him to learn, coach his leadership, actually get some pulse check on the reality. And culturally, those attendees walked away. Of course, they dialed in absolutely crapping themselves. Like, oh my God, I don't want to dial into this. What? Pick someone else. And it wasn't that bad. Oh, he's all right. He's pretty good. He asked some pretty good questions. Yeah, that wasn't as bad. He's all right. He's an all right bloke. Right. So, and that creates that sort of some more trust in the leadership level. So it was incredible. And it's so simple. It's ridiculous that we've got ourselves into these situations.
I have a couple questions that I ask most guests, and I'm curious, where, if you had a magic wand, would you focus training, or how would you change training for the next generation of safety professionals?
I think anyone that works with me gets pretty sick of me banging on about end user engagement. So I think I would ensure that we provide some real clarity and some of the tools and skills of actual end user involvement and engagement tools, which is something we did a lot in our human factors training. Whether it's a focus group, whether it's a learning team, whether it's unstructured interviews, like there's actual tools, structured and unstructured, depending on the type of person you are, that you can either very quickly gather, in a short amount of time from a small amount of people, to huge validated studies that you can do some great statistical analysis on. And I don't think that's something that's focused on enough in our qualification, in our training, to be honest, because we're sort of producing people that are told that they're the experts and it's their job to lay down the law. And it is. We want them to know the standards and what's required. But I also want to know their limitations and who their customer is.
If you could go back in time to the beginning of your safety career, however you define that, what's one piece of advice that you might give yourself?
If I had that, I'd be doing lots of advice. I'd be like, stop doing that. What are you doing? But if I had to pick one, if I could go back tomorrow, I've got lots to say to me yesterday as well. If I could say one thing, I guess it would probably be similar, and along a similar line, and I mentioned it before, not feeling that you have to be the expert, and that actually the value you add, that you can add in the room, is the curious person asking questions. So I think there was maybe a slight insecurity. Maybe it's just me as a young graduate, but I do think there's a slight insecurity sometimes in the safety profession that we have to add value. We have to justify our costs, why we exist in an organization a lot. So that means that we have to be telling and showing our expertise. If we were a little bit more comfortable, and if I'd been a bit more comfortable in realizing that actually our skill set or our value is asking questions, being curious, learning, constantly learning, or still learning, but then applying the science and the guidance and going, oh, okay, so this is your problem. Let me understand it from your perspective. I think I have the way that we can solve that. You don't have to know the answers, and you don't have to be an expert by telling. I think the nuances in asking and learning.
Yeah, I agree that asking the right questions is far more important and likely, and in a way easier than telling the right answers, because you how do you know they're right?
Exactly. Like, that's the thing with safety. It's like there isn't one right answer. It's like on this day with that team, it's different to what it was before. So yeah, it's was tricky.
How can our listeners learn more about the topics that we've talked about today? Or maybe I should say, are there any particular resources, books, websites, frameworks, or anything that you think have been particularly helpful that people should check out?
Yeah, so obviously with my human factors background, like I was brought up on reason, right? And then for me, some of Decker's work around Behind Human Error, I loved that book. That sort of, for me, it does a great job of pulling out some of those questions a bit more. I guess in terms of resources, I do love people like Conklin and Bob Edwards and Andrea Baker, what they write, what they put out. For me, it translates the science of human factors into something that is more business friendly and makes sense and is translatable. And that's something we didn't do very well as a human factors profession. We didn't influence and translate. So I love their stuff. I also think there's a lot to learn from Shine and Humble Inquiry ideas. But I also would also encourage people to go and look up Ben Hutchinson. I learned so much from he's doing podcasts now. And also for me, there's a group of quiet achievers inside organizations, just getting the work done. And so those are the resources, find those people. And yeah, I think one of the missions that I've had over the years, and why we had a global safety innovation conference a couple of years ago, we've got another one, GSI, coming up in early next year, in 2027, February time in Australia. One of our missions is to get those people working inside organizations. So yes, we'll have some amazing experts like Hallowell, love his work at the moment too. Drew Ray, big fan. They'll probably, hopefully, be there. I haven't asked them yet, but we want to get lots of people from organizations talking about the small wins. How are they tackling that problem? Workers, how did their job get easier or harder? So yeah, again, a very long answer. Sorry, Mary. Reach out on LinkedIn. My favorite thing to do is to actually just connect people. I can tell you my view on things, but I also will guarantee I'll know someone else in a similar role in another company with a similar challenge. Why don't you have a chat? Because you'll probably have solved part of it and they'll solve the other part. So I like to set up those kind of blind dates quite a lot. I think they're really fun.
For someone interested in the conference, where should they be looking? Like, is there a particular place that it's likely to be announced, or?
Yeah, so the globalsafetyinnovation.org is the website. And yeah, it will be posted on LinkedIn too, or just reach out to me on LinkedIn and ask anything you like. And we can, if you want to present or if you want to attend, just, reach out.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you, Zoe, for joining me.
Thank you so much. I was pretty stoked to be asked, given the guests you have. I listened to all of your podcasts. You get the best guests and ask really great questions. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks also to our listeners and the Safety Labs team. If you want to join the conversation, find us on the Safety Labs LinkedIn page. Bye for now. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.